Hey team, Art Appreciation, how's it going? So the plan for today is that we're going to work on smoothing our creature pot out, adding texture on our creature pot, and then also deciding about the rim. And the rim of a pot actually is called the lip of a pot. And I need to make some decisions to decide if I like that texture that's up there right now. Some of you have some pretty interesting cracks along the top. And then some of you don't want that top to look that rough. So this is called the drywall scraper, and it's a tool that is really great for pottery. You need to figure out which way the drywall scraper is going to scrape. So it's just like a cheese grater actually. So if I grate this way, I can tell that it's going to grate the clay right off the rim. If I grate this way, nothing's going to happen. So I'm going to hold my pot steady, and then I'm going to take it and run it across the top. And usually when I do it, I like to turn my pot, and what's happening is can you see that there's like little pieces of cheese, but they're not cheese, they're actually clay. Okay, so I'm just gonna rotate and rotate and rotate. I love this tool because this can get the top of your pot super even and without hardly any work. The other thing I like to do, so you can see that I just evened off the top just with the drywall scraper, so I just took it and scraped off the top. But what's important now to figure out is that if I want this to be a beveled edge. So can you see that it's pretty flat right here? I'm gonna take it. This makes a terrible mess, by the way. So right after you use the drywall scraper, I like to stop what I'm doing and clean up my area. So I'm gonna take it in an angle and just go in and drywall scrape the top. Now you guys that are at home, you're probably just going to have to do this with a knife unless you have a drywall scraper in the garage. So that, you can see it's so cool. This looks really good, okay? And it's nice and even, but now it's really, really choppy. But before I go on, I'm going to clean up my spot. So these little drywall shavings, that can just go right in the garbage. Just be careful, please don't put it Please don't put it on the floor because that makes terrible clay dust. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do something called the bird beak. And we use this a ton in clay. I use it a ton for all of my projects that I make. What I have here is a little bit of water. I'm going to get my fingers wet. And you're going to put your fingers like this between your pot. And I'm going to run the lip of my pot in between my fingers. And I'm going to spend probably, seriously, 4, 3, 5 minutes just spending time bird beaking my clay. Now if I take this and just go like this, well, it doesn't look any different. Well, yeah, right, man. You haven't done anything. What I'm doing is compressing the clay in between my fingers, running it back and forth and back and forth. And what it's doing, because I'm holding my fingers like this, little bird beak, actually I guess it would be chirp, chirp. Okay, little bird beak. I'm taking my time, smoothing it all the way around, running it all the way around, compressing that clay, and I still am not done. But because it's the video, I'm going to stop what I'm doing. Oh, actually, it's looking pretty good. Spend more time. If you feel like it's not working, it's because you haven't done it enough. You need to do at least 2 or 3 rotations on your pot, just a little bit of water, but that just completely changes the top of my pot. That looks so much better than before. Okay, so that's the first thing I wanted to talk to you about. The second thing I want to talk to you about, so that's number 1, is drywall scrape. Number 2 is just to take some time today and smooth out the surface of your pot. Some of you were like, wow, my pot looks pretty rough. Yesterday I heard that a little bit. That's just you taking your time, taking your thumb, and just smoothing down the surface. I'm not adding any water, but I'm just taking my time and just smoothing out the areas. Same goes for the facial features. You can tell that your clay has definitely hardened overnight a little bit. I had mine out quite a bit yesterday, so he's firming up. But definitely take your finger and smooth down your features. That's number 2. Okay, then step 3 is to figure out some textures. So what I would do with textures is, first of all, decide where I want them. And I think what I really liked about Brian Wilkerson's pots is I liked the way that he had like a little peak here. That's called a widow's peak. I don't know, it just looked like a little bit of, I don't know, I just thought it was kind of like a little bit of like Eddie Munster look or a little bit of a vampire look. And I'm going to leave the area in my face with without any texture. So I'm going to take a pin tool and just kind of draw that on to start with, and then I'm going to texture this whole area. So before we begin, what I would do is I would take a piece of clay from the pit, and this clay is pretty firm, just like my project. I'm going to flatten it out, and I'm going to experiment with some textures. So one cool texture to start with that I've really been intrigued a lot with on the internet is taking a pencil or a pen, but just a wooden pencil, and just put some polka dots in your clay. I'm going to show you this first, okay? So you just take it, put some polka dots in your clay, which I know you're like, whatever, it looks like I did that when I was in first grade. Okay, just give me a second so you can see what I'm doing. Then what you can do is you can take a bigger hole maker, okay? So I'm going to take a bigger hole maker and put some more polka dots next to it. Okay, then I can take a little piece of clay with it. Okay, I'm taking that, and I'm going to cut this in half. I'm going to cut it in half with my knife on my little scoopy. Get this back into a round ball, and slip and score this on. And this makes a really cool lumpy, bumpy texture. Put this half on. Score it like you mean it. Remember, otherwise it's going to fall off. Add a little water to it, a little slurry to it. And that could make a pretty fun texture all over the surface. So it looks like it's got kind of some lumps and bumps, but then it's also pressed in. That's kind of a cool texture. Another texture that's pretty fun, I think, is you can just take this tool. This is actually called a fettling knife. It's got a little round edge. And just by setting it on top of the clay and pressing down, it makes some really great scales. Okay, you see that? So that makes a pretty cool texture. Of course, another thing you could try is to take the drywall scraper. Not the drywall scraper. I'm sorry, take the little scoopy, and you could just drag this, clean off the little clay nerd on the end. That could make a pretty cool texture. Just those lines alone, I think, could be, especially like if I decided to do it here. Whoops, let me turn it this way. If I decided to do it here, I'm going to actually just try it. But one thing you want to think about, well, one of the elements of art is texture, but another thing to think about is repetition. So if I just take and do a whole bunch of textures on my creature pot, just like massive amounts of textures, I think they're going to look kind of messy. So what I would do is just try to make a decision that's going to carry you through your whole pot. So like, let's say, oh, that's looking cool. Look at that. That texture looks pretty fun. Kind of looks like there's a hat on them. What I was going to say is that, okay, let's say that I want to change into a different texture. I would do quite a few of these before I change into a different texture. So then that way it doesn't look so haphazard, like you just couldn't make a decision. And so then you decided to do every texture you could. Okay. Now, I know you're thinking, what about all these clay crumbs? This is really looking messy. We can clean that up tomorrow, so don't worry about that today. Those all can be, I'm not even going to touch them today, because if I try to smooth them down, they're going to land on top of the surface and then make a little lump there. Tomorrow or Friday, I'll be able to brush all those off. Okay, so that's texture today. I want you to experiment. Experiment first before you make any decisions. Lots of really fun tools over at the side counter, and Mr. Carlson has some fun tools as well. So just as a recap, we want you to drywall scrape the top, okay? Smooth out the inside if you need to, and then take some time and just smooth down the surface before you add texture. And I'm just holding my hand in the inside and smoothing it down on the outside. And then the third thing is to experiment with texture and try to figure out what it is you want to try to do. And then the last thing that we want you to work on then is adding texture onto your creature pot. At the end of the hour today, that's a cool texture. At the end of the hour today, we think it's in your best interest to set a damp paper towel next to your project. This doesn't have any water in it anymore, and I'm not putting it on top of or inside my project. I want you to set it just next to your project and then put it back into your airtight plastic. So then that way we'll be able to finish them up and kind of work with them tomorrow. Overnight, that's a cool texture. Overnight, I want you to think about if you want a handle or what kind of a foot you want. I'm going to add maybe a foot ring on the bottom of mine so it lifts its chin off the table when it's sitting. So those are the things we want you to work on today. Just remember, please, no clay nerds on the floor. Thanks, you guys.